I woke up a sleeping dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm going to tell you a story about when I was still a young man, in the second year of my marriage to Marlo, not her real name, who I'm still married to. We were camping with a group of friends when I went for a walk alone in the woods. That was when I encountered what I first thought was a deceased werewolf. I learned the hard way that although I was right about it being some kind of werewolf-like creature, I was way off base when assuming it had passed away. Marlo and I got married in 1986, so it had to have been 1988 when we were asked to go on a camping trip to Bass Lake in Wisconsin. There's a public beach there and a forest behind it that we'd camped in before when we were all still teenagers. I want to say that if you're afraid of the Dogman, don't let that be an excuse to not go to Bass Lake. It's actually a great vacation spot, especially during the summer. And although I must have gone there 24 times, this was the one and only time I encountered anything weird or strange in the slightest. I've spoken to locals who spent their entire lives in the area, and in all that time I've only met 2 people who claim to have seen cryptids of any kind. You probably have a better chance to win the lottery than to see Dogman there, let alone be endangered by his presence. Nevertheless, my fellow campers and I were in fact quite literally endangered by the supposedly mythological monster. So it was the first night of our reunion. There were 8 of us in the camp, and things were not as fun as we had anticipated. My former best friend Bradley, not his real name, had brought his harpy of a wife with him, and she was working overtime, making us all miserable. When someone would crack a joke, she would lecture us all about how it wasn't funny. No matter what subject anyone brought up, she had the worst takes possible. If any of you are old enough to remember Tipper Gore, she even defended Tipper's attempted forced censorship of the music industry. In fact, let's just call Bradley's wife Tipper, because I'm getting a headache thinking about her. None of us would have gone on the trip if we had known that Tipper was coming along. She seemed to survive by stealing your positive energy and turning it into something bad and wrong. You know how ghosts can sometimes drain battery power in order to manifest? Well, Tipper drained all fellowship and all good cheer out of any situation. I was so annoyed with her down behavior that night that I told my wife I needed to take a walk and get my temper under check. If I hadn't left right then, I would have told Tipper what I thought of her, and things would have gotten much worse. So, off I went into the woods behind our camp, and soon I was enjoying seeing the light of the setting sun peeking through the woods around me. It would be night very soon, but the forest was still lit up with golden light all around, and I slowly started to remember how good life could be, at least when Tipper wasn't there. That was when I first saw the Dogman or werewolf or whatever it was. It really did look a lot like those gray or bluish dogmen that you often show in your thumbnails, but it was lying on its back on a rock in a tiny clearing. It was a relatively flat-topped rock, and it served as the Dogman's bed in essence. But my first impression was not that the animal was sleeping. I stared intently at the big thing, looking for its chest to move up and down, breathing in its sleep. I don't know if it was the fading light of the day, or if it was the angle I was viewing it at, but I did not see the creature breathing. I reasoned that it had to have passed on, and I approached a bit closer. I was still hiding behind the big tree and peering out at it, but I got as close as I could, which was, I guess, around 20 feet away. I swear, I still was not seeing that chest breathing. In fact, I was not noticing any movement at all, except for its fur blowing around a little each time the wind picked up. I was not aware in those days that real werewolves were a thing, and so I think you can understand why I just stood there staring, trying to understand what it was that I was witnessing. I still to this day don't know if this was a werewolf or a dogman or some third kind of thing, so I'll just describe it to you. The nose was at the end of a long dog snout, and I could see teeth through the slightly opened mouth. Every dog I've ever seen breathes with its mouth open and its tongue hanging out. There was none of that going on here. As I said, that mouth was only somewhat open, and no tongue lolled out of it. This probably added to my feeling that the creature had expired before I happened upon it, although I don't remember for certain. The eyes were shut, obviously. Whether it was dead or alive, it was not conscious as I entered the scene. There was a smell of wet dog in the air, which I took to be the odor of it having passed on. Little did I realize that thing smelled that bad while it was still alive. The very still but broad chest looked human, and the belly had the thinnest layer of fur on it of the whole body. Nearly everywhere else, the animal or man thing appeared covered in a shaggy gray coat of fur. It had 2 arms folded over its chest, and those arms appeared as human as they appeared shaggy and furry. It looked to me at first like a hairy man with a dog-like head lying on a rock surface. I did not notice that the legs were inhuman, although I don't remember why. Maybe I was just looking at its face, arms, and chest so much that the legs didn't have time to catch my interest. It's also possible that the legs looked more human as it lay on its back in a prone position. Maybe the angle I was viewing it from hid the detail that this creature's legs looked more canine than human, but at any rate, I didn't notice that feature as it lay on the stone. My mind was trying to fathom what my eyes were seeing, but I wasn't coming up with very many good explanations. It kind of looked a lot like the monsters in that horror movie The Howling. It really did. So I wondered if I was looking at a werewolf in real life. The thing is, in the movies, when a werewolf's life is ended, he or she usually tends to transform back into their human shape, and this thing, obviously, had not done that. I heard the sound of someone coming through the woods behind me from back in the camp. Assuming it was my wife come to look for me, I turned around to look for her. I wanted to warn her to be quiet and to come look at what I'd found. I wasn't afraid of the Dogman per se, but I wondered who placed the body where it was, and I wondered if those other people, or Dogmen, were still in the area. For all I knew, there might be 1 or more additional living versions of that manimal in the forest all around me. You can imagine my surprise and disappointment when I saw that it was not in fact my wife coming to look for me at all, but the heinous woman, Tipper, that I was trying to avoid instead. When she saw me, she started admonishing me loudly that I couldn't hide from her. I wasn't hiding from anyone, but that was her M.O. Accuse you of doing something wrong, so that then she could lecture you and belittle you and act like she was better than everyone else. And this time, she picked the absolute worst time and place to put on her little act. I waved my hands in front of me to signal to her to be quiet, which of course she claimed was me shutting her up because I couldn't stand a strong woman or some nonsense like that. I desperately put my finger in front of my mouth in the universal sign for please be quiet, and that pushed her over into what these days might be called full Karen mode, if you know what I mean. There was no stopping an ego that large, or a mouth that wide. I turned to look into the clearing to see if any other creatures had joined the deceased werewolf as a result of her bellowing and haranguing. There had not, but that was because I was not witnessing a funeral. It wasn't a funeral because the Dogman or werewolf or whatever it was had not passed on as of yet. Now how did I suss that out? Because when I looked back toward the big stone, the Dogman was no longer lying down on it. You see, when I looked back, I saw that Dogman sitting up on the edge of the rock, looking like someone woke him up 20 minutes before his alarm clock was scheduled to go off. He was rubbing the sleep out of his eyes in much the same way we do it, and he looked unhappy. He had this expression and body posture like he had been having a really good dream. And then all of a sudden, whoopsie, there was our lovely friend Tipper to bring him back to the land of the living. Speaking of Tipper, she walked right in front of the tree I was hiding behind, turned her back to the Dogman without once making any note of it, and continued her accusations and pompous condescension toward me. I don't remember what illogical nonsense she was spouting that time, as it seemed to me that there was something a little more important going on behind her. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she screeched as though she were my mother, but I continued to stare past her at the werewolf man instead. Her words sort of melted into the background of my consciousness to sound like adults in the Charlie Brown cartoons. Wah, 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 wah. If you were witnessing a werewolf or Dogman standing up for the first time in your life, you'd also find the rest of reality sort of melting away. For the first time, I really noticed the immense size of the thing. It must have been over 7 feet tall. I mean, my sense of it was that this was much larger than even that, but it sounds impossible, even to me, that it could have been as tall as it seemed. Maybe it was the intense musculature and the sheer width of the creature that made it seem 9 or 10 feet tall. After all, the only humans I've ever seen as ripped as this Dogman were bodybuilders, so this was a kind of a giant version of that. I couldn't even imagine that something like that could exist, first of all, and if I had believed a mammal that large were hanging out in Wisconsin, I would have assumed it was quadrupedal, down on all fours like a moose or a bear. That was also when I noticed for the first time that the legs were animal legs, not human. He had paws at the ends of those legs, which appeared larger than my hands, but still, they were canine paws, not human feet. The legs were constructed like a dog or a wolf, not like what I had been seeing in my mind, while the creature was still laying down. The sleepy monstrosity took a dizzy step forward, still in the process of waking up, and it was clear he was growing increasingly annoyed with the loud person in front of me and her non-stop discourse about her own superiority. I wasn't listening to her any longer, so I don't know why she finally turned to see what I was looking past her at. I just remember that she screamed so loudly that she temporarily deafened my left ear, and I winced in pain. Believe it or not, the Dogman winced too, and then it barked out a scream of its own, far lower pitched than Tipper's. The two scariest things in those woods were facing off against each other, and I was pretty certain Tipper had finally met her match. No amount of shouting, berating, and insulting was going to protect her from those teeth and those claws. I looked at this situation, and suddenly I realized how lucky I was to have Tipper there, because she always needed to make everything about herself, and that meant the Dogman was no longer interested in me. He wasn't looking at me, and I could tell he wasn't thinking about me either. He had this expression on his dog face, as though he wondered what Tipper's dark meat might taste like. I was out of there, running back to camp at top speed, but I had no plan for what I would do when I got there. With my one good ear, I could hear Tipper screaming and running, with the Dogman following close behind. I really honestly thought that we were both goners. I didn't think I would even make it back to camp, so when I did, I grabbed my wife Marlowe's hand and tried to pull her into our tent. She didn't know what was happening, and I assumed that's what she was asking me about, but I don't actually remember. I just know I was trying to get my wife and myself out of the path of danger when Tipper ran into the clearing we had set up camp in, screaming incoherently as she ran. I never saw her look so frightened before. It took the Dogman to finally top that woman in an argument. Screaming at her poor husband Bradley to help her, Tipper ran straight through our camp and back into the woods on the other side. Brad stood up, confused, wondering what was happening until bam! Through the woods, the Dogman exploded, sending leaves and branches flying and causing all of us to scream in surprise and fear. This creature was too large to be possible and too frightening looking to endure. Each time one of his feet hit the ground, the entire scene shook from the weight of the creature banging into the earth. I felt like fainting, I really did. It stormed off into the woods following Tipper's screeching, and to his credit, Bradley ran after the two of them. He was crying for his wife as though he couldn't live without her. Now that's true love, man. Marlo and I went into our tent, zipped up, and sat there in shock, neither of us saying one single word to the other for a good 10 minutes. Pretty soon 3 of our friends came by and said they were leaving, inviting us to come along, which we did. Well, Bradley stopped talking to me after that, as though it were my fault that even Dogman can't stand his wife. I never got the details about what happened, but she got away unharmed. I mean, I guess she got dirty or tore her clothing or something, but she survived. Instead of being grateful for that like anyone else would have been, she blamed all the rest of us for not running into the woods after her and the giant upright running canine. I wouldn't have done that even if she were someone I could stand, as it would be suicide. Someone in camp called 911 and got through, and I remember a helicopter overhead before we left. Marlo and I split with the others. We didn't see what we could do to help, and quite honestly, we were more concerned about our own safety than hers. I felt sure Tipper would be fine. If push came to shove, she could use her energy-draining and pain-inducing superpower of being completely unlikable to save her. Marlo asked me what I would tell the police or park rangers when they showed up, and I told her I would tell them the truth. Then I realized after hearing those words come out of my mouth how stupid an idea that would be. We did need to get out of there, and so the 5 of us beat it back to our cars as the night came on super fast. I know that's not what heroes in the movies would do, but that is what we did, and I have no regrets about any of it. That Dogman or werewolf was the worst thing I ever encountered, and I hope to never see him or anything like him ever again. In fact, I did run into Tipper again once, about 9 years later, in a mall of all places. Her ego hadn't mellowed one tiny bit, as she launched again into one of her tirades, shouting at me and drawing attention, claiming that I left her for dead in the wilderness. She was so dramatic and so loud that she drew a crowd, and some of them were laughing at the ridiculous scene she was creating. One young woman called out, "Hey lady, I would have left you for dead too," and got a huge laugh from the crowd, but that didn't slow Tipper down. She was one of those kinds of creatures in the world that gains strength by draining others around her. She was technically human, but in reality more of a demon or monster than a living creature. Marlo calls her the human poltergeist, which always cracks me up. They say everyone has some kind of value, but Tipper did not. This was walking negative value. She was born possessed, and that heavy, horrible entity that possessed her was so negative that even Dogman reacted to her with disgust and anger. Sometimes I start to take life too literally, and I begin to believe that the surface value of things is real. But then I remember who the true monster was. On the day when I accidentally woke up a Dogman. Our executive producer is C. Gonzalez, more fun than tame or wild impalas. She's the baddest one in the whole arena. She's our executive producer, Christina. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Cristina Gonzalez, for making this episode possible. She's a $10 channel member, so she gets all our perks, including our secret uncensored stories far too wild to tell on this channel, and our 21 hours of archived, secret, scary, uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. And you can share these perks too. All you need to do is join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or click that join link under this or any of our videos and become a Scary Stories channel member. And now, here's TV spokesdog Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.